Is that going to be?
The UN's position on Syria has been consistent.
There is no such military solution in this case. There is no military solutions to this conflict. There is no military solution.
But those words are now sounding very hollow. In eastern Aleppo, no one expects a political settlement. Hour by hour, the Assad government, backed by Hezbollah, Iran, and the military might of Russia, is advancing. On Talk to Al Jazeera, we speak about the nearly 6-year-long catastrophe in Syria, which may have claimed as many as 500,000 lives, with the man who's led the UN throughout the conflict. Ban Ki-moon is in his final few weeks of his 10-year term in his office here on the 38th floor of the UN building. We ask him about the state of the war, about the human suffering, and whether there'll be accountability for the war crimes that have been committed. With Donald Trump, a man who's declared the UN weak and incompetent, becoming the US president just days after Ban leaves office, we ask what it means for the international system. He's threatened to tear up the Iran nuclear deal, reconsider the US's improved relations with Cuba, and pull out of the Paris Climate Accord, all things Ban Ki-moon considers achievements. He even described the Iran deal as a triumph of diplomacy. We also asked Secretary-General Ban about his future after he leaves office on December the 31st. With political crisis and widespread protests in his home country of South Korea, some in the country are hoping Ban will put his name forward as a candidate in the next presidential election. We'll ask him about his intentions. Secretary-General, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. You're nearly at the end of your term. When you became Secretary-General in 2006, it was after a decade in which we'd seen the genocide in Rwanda, which we'd seen brutality in Bosnia, Srebrenica, for example. And the world said never again. And yet, for the last 5 years, it's happened again. How is history going to judge the international community on Syria?
It has been quite a sad and heartbreaking experience for me to see Syrian people have been suffering tremendously during the last 5 years. It's a collective failure of international community. When the Syrian people among themselves were fighting, then international community, United Nations and regional powers should have helped them resolve their problems. But unfortunately, regional powers and the United Nations, particularly Security Council, have been divided. That is why we have not been able to resolve this issue. There is no military solution. I have been making quite clearly all the times, only inclusive, Syrian-led intra-Syrian dialogue.
But that's become a mantra. That's become a mantra of yours, Secretary General. There is no military solution. And yet look at eastern Aleppo. There is a military solution unfolding hour by hour before us.
My special envoy, Stefan de Mistura, has been working very hard. Of course, I have been reaching out to the leaders of the region. And I appreciate, in fact, United States, led by John Kerry, Secretary of State, and Minister Lavrov of Russia to have a deal made. But it has always been broken all the times. We have more than 5 million refugees and 12 million people who are in need of urgent life-saving and life-sustaining support. These are all tragic situations now. There is no time to spend at this time. We must have a cessation of hostilities and engage in political dialogue between the parties, led by and facilitated by the United Nations.
The problem is that one man certainly believes in a military solution. In October, you said no country's destiny should rest on the fate of any single individual. We know who you were talking about, President Assad. Prime Minister Cameron of the UK is out of office. You'll be leaving in a few weeks. President Obama a few weeks after you. And yet President Assad will still be in office. What does that say to you, that a man who's been responsible for such brutality, quite possibly war crimes, seems to be having things his way?
Even though the justice cannot be done today, I am confident that there will be justice, whoever one may be, the perpetrators and violating seriously international human rights and humanitarian law, and who commits war crimes and the crimes against humanity. We have seen in the history, whatever happened in Rwanda and Srebrenica and Yugoslavia, the United Nations has been setting up international tribunal to bring justice to those perpetrators. So I'm quite confident that there will be a justice system. But what is most important at this time is to save human lives, as many as possible, as much as we can do, and deliver humanitarian assistance. We have been delivering average per month more than 5 million people. And we even dropped airdrops to 1.2 million people, and we have been providing medical support to 7 million people per month. That is a huge task, but we need some space, the cessation of hostilities.
I was asking you about accountability, and you said whoever the perpetrators may be. But I was also asking you about the culpability of one man. We know he's a perpetrator. We know he has ultimate control in Syria, don't we?
He will be responsible for history. He will be responsible for justice. And
he's responsible for barrel bombs. He's responsible for chemical weapons.
Of course.
He has ultimate command. He must be the man responsible, yes?
I have established already twice the special investigative team for chemical weapons 3 years ago, and now I'm encouraged that this joint investigative mechanism, JIM, has been extended by another year. Therefore, we must make sure that there should be accountability process. Yeah.
What action should be taken then?
The international community will take necessary action.
Really?
Yes.
The Security Council is constantly deadlocked when it comes to action.
It may be divided now, but there will be a time that we will make sure that violators of international human rights law will be put to justice process.
There's somewhere else, it seems, they believe in a military solution, and that's in Moscow. Russia has moved its military might to Syria. It's been involved in an onslaught, a bombardment of Syria. It's maintaining sieges, it's bombing hospitals, it may even have bombed an aid convoy. Is this the sort of thing a permanent member of the UN Security Council should be engaged in?
I have been making quite clear repeatedly that there is no military solution. This is wrong.
But President Putin's not listening to you.
There is a need to take certain cases to take military action to fight the extremists and terrorists and al-Nusra Front. All these groups should be deterred and defeated by whatever means. Now, once you started in fighting against terrorism and extremism, I'm afraid that all this air bombardment has killed so many civilian population. That must be stopped soon.
Should you not, though, be tougher with Russia, a country which also, while you were Secretary General, annexed a part of another country, Crimea?
Now, all these issues, which have happened during recently, must be solved peacefully through dialogue, and the United Nations has made it quite clear in their resolution about the situation of Crimea. Yeah.
Let me ask you about accountability, because the place for that is the International Criminal Court, and yet in recent weeks Russia has expressed its displeasure with the court. African nations are pulling out, more say they're thinking of pulling out. What is the future of the International Criminal Court, and for these crimes in Syria, will there ever be accountability if the court doesn't continue its work?
I'm deeply concerned by the stated withdrawal by South Africa, Gambia, and Burundi. And also, even though Russia has not ratified this agreement, Rome Statute, but all this kind of a trend makes great complications to the smooth international justice system. The international community has made this International Criminal Court through painstaking negotiations. This must be preserved. I know that there may be some complaints or some difficulties for any state parties to this Rome Statute, but there is a venue, this assembly of state parties. That's the place where the parties to this Rome Statute should bring their problems and resolve there. It's not the responsible actions by the state parties to just withdraw from this.
You are now counting your days until the end of your time as Secretary General. 20 days after you leave office, a new US president takes office, Donald Trump. He's described the UN as weak and incompetent. What do you say to that?
United Nations and United States particularly, who is a founding member and also member of Security Council, has a crucially important role to play. They have been playing such a role since the founding of the United Nations during the last 71 years. There have been many changes of administration from Republican to Democrat, from Democrat to Republican. We have had no problems with any administration who have been committed to peace and security and human rights and development. I am sure that President-elect Donald Trump will also continue to play a very important global role in working together with the United Nations in maintaining peace and security and development and human rights. That's their interest, that's their commitment too.
Does he have a point, though, when he says the UN is incompetent or, in fact, inefficient? Because, let me read this to you. Anthony Banbury, you'll remember, a rising star in the UN system. You put him in charge of the response to Ebola. When he resigned a year ago, he wrote in frustration, "If you locked a team of evil geniuses in a laboratory, they could not design a bureaucracy so complex. The system is a black hole in which disappear countless tax dollars and human aspirations, never to be seen again." Is that the UN you recognise?
This is an organization where 193 member states are participating. This is such a huge universal organization, international organization, has sometimes its weakness and inefficiencies. We admit it. But United Nations, since its founding, has been making great efforts to improve its efficiencies and effectiveness. It's not easy to harmonize the views of 193 member states at this time. Therefore, the United Nations 70 years ago, even 50 years or 30 years ago, is quite different from now, the United Nations 2016 or 2017. Therefore, member states should bring their global perspectives rather than narrow national perspectives. That is the way why United Nations has often been criticized as inefficient and not been able to make a decision. The reform process has always been there, including the Security Council reform, and particularly during the last 10 years when I have been in charge of this organization as a Secretary General. I have made tremendous reforms to make this organization more transparent, more accountable, and more effective. For example, mobility process and UMOJA process. And all these are very important ones. Financial assets disclosure policies. And all these are some of very fundamentally important measures which I have made.
Important measures, bureaucratic reforms, but let me talk about the UN's role around the world. The UN brought cholera to Haiti. The UN failed to protect people in South Sudan. In Central African Republic, peacekeepers were actually involved in sexual abuse of children. Are you ashamed that sometimes your United Nations, rather than doing good, is doing harm?
As far as Haiti cholera epidemic is concerned, I'm going to report to the General Assembly soon this week about the due approach. I have already expressed that United Nations has moral responsibility, and I have expressed my deep regret for not being able to help people who have suffered from this cholera epidemic. On other sexual abuses and violations by peacekeepers and UN staff, I have made zero tolerance policies, and I have taken the immediate actions. Of course, what happened in Juba last July in South Sudan, I have also made the special investigation team and made the firm decision to show the messages that nobody will be tolerated when they make crimes. People should not expect on the ground that those people who are there to protect them should be the violators of their human rights. That's a totally unacceptable one. And on this sexual violence issues, I have made zero tolerance policies.
It's a very grim picture when you look at the situation in some of those African countries and you look at the situation, we talked about Syria, but in other places in the Middle East. But there are some positive glimmers. There are some recent achievements. For example, the US restored relations with Cuba. There's the Iran nuclear deal. And also there's what you, I know, consider a personal achievement, which is the climate change deal in Paris. The problem with those three successes is that Donald Trump is considering tearing up all three.
Well, I have heard what he said during his electoral campaign process. Normally, the presidential election campaign process is hard fighting, and a lot of rhetorics are being said. Recently I had a telephone talk with Donald Trump, president-elect. I discussed all the issues. While we are living in an era of turmoil and difficulties, but the United Nations has presented a great sense of hope to the international community. Not to mention about all these Iranian nuclear deals and all other improved relationship between the United Nations and Cuba. But Sustainable Development Goals with the 17 goals aiming by 2030 and Paris Agreement on climate change, those are real visionary and most ambitious framework which United Nations has presented to the world to make this world healthier, more prosperous, more peaceful.
Let me ask you about climate change, though, because Donald Trump has been quite clear he's not sure whether he believes there is climate change. What do you say to him?
Recently, in his interview with certain media, he said that he is open minded on climate change.
Convince him that there's a problem.
Now, 196 countries have signed this agreement, and more than 112 countries have ratified in such a record time. It's not the only governments or certain politicians, but it's the people on the ground, it's the business communities. They are demanding that climate change must be addressed properly as soon as possible. The scientists of the world have made it plainly clear that climate change has been caused by human behavior and is approaching much faster than expected. And therefore, it is only natural that the human society must address this one. Now, for example, since Mr. Donald Trump is going to be next president of the United States, he has been such a successful global business person, leader. Now he's going to be global political leader. What the business communities are doing, have been doing, will continue to do is that they have been retooling, changing their business operations into low carbon economy, decarbonizing. This is what they have understood. They are not forced to do that. They are doing it because it's their interest, and it is the interest to the people and to the world. For example, big cities like California State or like Las Vegas, and Nashville, and all these big cities and states, they are now changing their economic operational directions into low carbon and climate resilient economic tools. That's what governments are doing. That's what civil society also are doing. There's a huge movement among people on the ground, civil society. It will be very important that the United States lead this campaign as they did with China. And I'm hopeful that this climate change will be moving on. Yeah.
Secretary General, you're nearly at the end of this job. What is going to be your next job? Your own country, South Korea, is in crisis. Will you consider running as the president? Lots of people have talked about that.
Now I'm still focusing on the huge jobs mandated to me as a Secretary General.
Only for a few more days. This is the same stock answer you gave me when I interviewed you almost 2 years ago. Let me put the question a different way. If the people of South Korea call on you, will you consider serving your country?
Now, on current situations which have been unfolding in Korea, of course, as one of the citizens of Korea, I have been closely following with great concerns. People have been expressing their anger and frustrations about the lack of good governance within the government. At the same time, I can say that the Korean people are very proud for what international community regards for their successful economic development as well as successful democratic institutions. I'm confident that with such maturity and wisdom and resilience of Korean people have shown during the last many decades, they will soon be able to overcome this current situation to build upon on their proud history.
Will you give them help in some role? Will you offer your help to your nation?
As a Secretary General, at this time, I do not have anything to say, but come January 1st, 2017, when I return to Korea, I will need to discuss with some community leaders and my friends on what and how I can contribute as a former Secretary General of the United Nations to my motherland, Korea.
Let's talk about January the 1st. You will no longer be the Secretary General. How do you think you're going to feel? Is it going to feel like a huge burden has been lifted?
Of course, I will be relieved from this huge burden, mental and physical. But it has been a great privilege for me to have served this great organization for humanity during the last 10 years. Now, as a private citizen, I will still be embedded with such principles and goals of the United Nations, on which I have been working, like the international peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. As a private citizen, I will try to continue to raise my voice and contribute whatever I can and do to help the United Nations. At the same time, I will also think about what would be the best way for me to work for my own country.
Secretary General, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera for the last time in your role as Secretary General, but I hope you'll talk to us again, whatever role you have in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.